So it seems like week one's activities or exercises in the LB Brief Handbook have thrown a lot of you for a loop. So I thought I would just walk you through the answers that I would give, and hopefully that will clear up whatever the confusion might be. So the activity was asking you if the following sentences were limited and specific. And what that means is that a thesis statement is supposed to deal with one idea, only one idea. You want your thesis to be narrow, and you also want it to be broad, which is really difficult. I know it's a hard concept. It's narrow enough that it's just a paper and not a set of encyclopedias, but it's also broad enough that it can be more than one paragraph and it can run up to 5 pages. And this is a really difficult thing to do, and a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is. The other thing that the activity asks you to do is to determine if the thesis is unified. And that means that all of its parts would match up and the ideas in the thesis move in the same direction. There aren't two ideas competing for attention, and this thesis actually has the possibility of bringing out a pretty good paper. So let's look at the options here, or at the candidates. So number 1 reads for you, aggression usually leads to violence, injury, and even death, and we should use it constructively. Well, alright, aggression usually leads to violence, injury, and even death. Does it really? There are different types of aggression. So salespeople can be aggressive, athletes can be aggressive. This claim is already off to a bad start. Also, if aggression is so dangerous, then can it even be used constructively? Which is what the thesis is telling us. And so it seems like the first half of this is kind of contradicting the second half. It doesn't match. It's possibly just two separate ideas. And so one thing that could possibly save this is to rewrite it as something like, although aggression is often thought of as synonymous with violence, injury, and even death, aggression can be a positive tactic and it can be used constructively. It's not great, and to be honest, a lot of times the best that I can do is say, well, what we could try is this, because a lot of times when you write something, you know what you mean, and after many years of experience, I can make a best guess at what you mean, but sometimes what I guess and what you intend are completely different. And so, be careful with how you word things. I try to give the best advice possible, but I don't always know what it was you were going for. Okay? So let's look at number 2. The religion of Islam is widely misunderstood in the United States. Ugh. So this type of redundancy makes me crazy. Look up Islam in the dictionary. It's a religion. It's understood. You don't need to explain it and write it. That's like writing landlords who rent space to tenants. It's what they do. It's a definition. So if we took it out and we said simply, Islam is widely misunderstood in the United States, that's a much better thesis statement. We know that there's a topic for the paper, and that's Islam, and there's a claim that you're going to be backing up somehow, with evidence or argument, and that is that Islam is widely misunderstood in the United States. And so this is a much better start. However, if I would say Islam is widely misunderstood in the United States, that's pretty broad. That actually could be a book. In fact, I'm sure it is a book, especially right now. And so we would maybe want to look at a certain portion of Islam or narrow it down to a small area in the United States. But still, we have a topic and we have an assertion about it, so it's better. Islam is widely misunderstood in the United States. How about number 3? Number 3 says, one evening of a radio talk show amply illustrates both the appeal of such shows and their silliness. This one has me wondering, will the essay look at the show's appeal, their silliness, or both? As long as it discusses both equally, then this thesis is okay, because the wording suggests, it will look at both of these things equally. But please take note, it's okay. It's not great. but it's limited and it's unified. So how about number 4? Good manners make our society work. Ugh. A rule of thumb: if it sounds like something that could be embroidered on a throw pillow, it is not a good thesis. So, aside from sounding folksy, this thesis is incredibly broad. Whole self-help and parenting books have been written on this topic. And so this one, I'll be honest, I don't even know how to save it. So let's move on to number 5. The poem is about motherhood. Okay, so I teach Introduction to Literature in addition to teaching composition courses, and I see these types of thesis statements, all the time. But rule of thumb number 2, if you think the poem can be summed up in a single word like motherhood, read it again. And if it truly can be summed up in a single word in your thesis statement, then how on earth will you fill pages of an essay discussing a statement of fact? For this thesis to work, it would have to be controversial. Like, while some believe green eggs and ham is about stepping out of one's comfort zone, it's about motherhood. It's a bad example, but you see what I'm saying. If you say that something's about motherhood, that has to be controversial in some way. Otherwise, that's just a statement of fact. And a thesis has to have a claim in it that you're going to defend, a topic and an assertion. Number 6 says, I disliked American history in high school, but I like it in college. That's wonderful. And I'm happy for the person who wrote this, because I happen to be married to a history professor, so that would make him happy as well. The topic has potential for a paper, but the thesis should really pick one idea and go with it. Tell us about high school in the body paragraphs instead. So, I now once I got to college, I began to like American history. Save the high school part, keep it out of the thesis altogether, and come up with something a little more focused. Number 7, cell phones are useful for adults who have busy schedules, but they can be harmful for children. This one is similar to the example for unity in the book. Its parts aren't really working together. A stronger version could be, cell phones' usefulness for busy adults in no way warrants their everyday use by children. It acknowledges that they're useful, but it focuses more on the children. Number 8, drunken drivers whose perception and coordination are impaired should receive mandatory suspensions of their licenses. Dear Lord, this one is similar to that religion of Islam thing in being redundant. Only here the redundancy could come back to haunt the writer. What if someone is drunk but his or her perception and coordination show no signs of impairment? What then? I'm not sure it can happen. Years and years ago, there was a television show called WKRP in Cincinnati, and the one disc jockey took part in an experiment with the state police where he would be on the air and he would have a drink, and they would test his reflexes every hour or something like that. And the odd thing was that, of course, every hour after his drink, he got faster and faster. So what if there's someone out there who really is like that? His perception and coordination actually improve when he has drinks. So drunken drivers whose perception and coordination are impaired should receive suspensions. If they're drunk but their perception and coordination aren't impaired, then did they not receive mandatory suspensions? This one would be better if simply states drunken drivers should receive mandatory suspensions of their licenses. Done and done. Number 9, business is a good major for many students. This is a pretty vague claim. What qualifies a major as good? For example, how are we judging what good is? How many is many in many students? This might serve as some sort of working thesis until the writer figures out his or her stance in the examples, but it would absolutely have to be tweaked for the final draft. The last one, number 10, the state's lenient divorce laws undermine the institution of marriage, which is fundamental to our culture, and they should certainly be made stricter for couples who have children. Wow, this is really 3 claims. The laws undermine marriage, and marriage is fundamental, and back to the laws, we should make it harder for couples with children to divorce. Not to mention, the tone is a little bit self-righteous. The "and they should certainly" part feels kind of preachy to me, and the worst thing you want to do is make your readers feel like you're lecturing them. So this thesis needs to be narrowed down, stat. My advice typically, if I notice you have 2 or more ideas, pick one and go with it. Write about what you know or what you care about, but pick one and go with it. You can't have 3 things going on in a thesis statement. So, key things to remember about thesis statements. The thesis statement is the main or the controlling idea of your essay. Everything that you put in an essay has to link back to that thesis statement in some way, or it has to advance the claim that you're making in some way. Your thesis should typically come as the last sentence in your introductory paragraph. That's where you as a reader expect it, and so that's where we should put it. Any place that you would think of as a reader, or anything you think of as a reader, think of as a writer. Whether you realize it or not, you expect the thesis to come at the end of the first paragraph or the introduction, and so that's where we're going to put it. The thesis should have or give your reader a good idea of the general topic of your essay and also the assertion or the claim that you're going to make about it. So you always want a topic and a clear assertion about that topic, and your thesis should be 1 sentence. You can cheat a little bit maybe by having 2 sentences joined by a semicolon, but ideally your thesis is 1 statement, 1 sentence, and it comes at the final spot in your introductory paragraph. All right, I hope this explains everything a little bit better.